Well, it's another Sunday morning and time to bring you up to speed with all the big news topics of the week. You're watching Media Monitor with me, Alicia Jali. Here's what we have coming up for you this morning. We start by looking at the legacy and life of the Cuban politician and revolutionary leader Fidel Castro. We analyze the theme and objective of World AIDS Day 2016, and we also ask, are the current global efforts to fast-track ending the AIDS epidemic enough? We also delve into Sanral's outrageous 11 billion rand in outstanding e-toll debt and wrap up the show by asking if the dismissal of Citizen newspaper's suspended editor Steven Motale was indeed fair, or is there any violation of media freedom? Well, our analysts unpack all these right here on your favorite Sunday morning show. But first, as always, it's 900 hours. Let's take a look at the news making headlines this hour. President Jacob Zuma has launched a legal challenge to the State of Capture report. Presidential spokesperson Dr. Bongani Ngulunga confirmed that the president filed papers at the High Court in Pretoria on Friday to set aside the former public protector's report. The president has called the report unfair, saying it has been dealt with in a very funny way. He's expressed unhappiness that Thuli Madonsela directed Chief Justice Mogoeng to choose a judge to lead that inquiry. A multilingual community newspaper, Lekunutu, has been launched at the Cyverscale village outside Pretoria. Communications Minister Faith Mutambi launched the paper. The newspaper, which published its very first edition this week, will cater for residents in the Moretele as well as Bela areas. Now, the publication aims to empower the communities of Moretele and surrounding areas. And some sporting news now. Some Buccaneers were held to a lively 2-2 draw at home to bottom club at newly promoted Highlands Park at Orlando Stadium last night. Tendai Ndoro's brace was not enough to seal victory for the Buckship. Tanduyise Kuboni and Lindo Mbata got the goals for Highlands Park to earn a much-needed point. Newly promoted Highlands Park are still at the bottom of the log table, and they've only gathered 8 points from 11 games. All right, let's welcome our panel this morning. We welcome political analyst Professor Steven Friedman and media analyst Mr. Dominic Mahlangu. Gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Morning.
All right, and now for a look at the big hashtags of this weekend. For this segment, we have another SABC digital news producer, the beautiful Miss Lerato Matlala. Lerato, very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much.
What do you have for us on the digital front today? What was the biggest hashtag of the week?
So the first hashtag was the hashtag credit rating.
Oh yes.
This was after S&P released its announcement on Friday. And an overwhelming number of people were happy that we survived another downgrade.
What are they saying on social media?
So looking at ACDP South Africa, hashtag ACDP is grateful that Standard & Poor did not relegate South Africa to junk status. Downgrading Eskom demonstrates issues in management. So this was
I see another one here from COSATU. It says it has welcomed the decision of Standard & Poor's not to downgrade the country to junk status. So these are the big players. But gentlemen, what did you make? I'm sure you were all sitting there waiting patiently to hear the outcome of what the ratings agencies were about to say, Professor Friedman.
Well, actually we were, because it is quite important. I mean, I'm very cynical about rating agencies, but the point is that if they do downgrade you, there's a problem. Now, look, I think there are 2 points to be made about this. I mean, the first one is that the reason it happened mainly is because government, business and labour got together. Because if that hadn't have happened, there would have been a downgrade. I think the other thing from a political point of view, this does quite significantly strengthen the hand of the Treasury and the Finance Minister. Because at the beginning of the year, clearly one of the Finance Minister's jobs was to prevent a downgrade, and most people believed it wasn't possible. And he's done that, and I think that puts him in a very strong position, and the Treasury in a very strong position for the next year.
What did you think, Dominic? A quick one?
No, for me it's good news, going to this crazy month called December, and I think that we'll approach the new year, with a bit of hope.
Yeah.
But I agree with the professor here that at least Treasury can have that sigh of relief to say that at least their efforts throughout the year to work with business and labor, have resulted in these results. But it doesn't stop here. We need to continue to make sure that we change the situation.
0.5% growth is not enough. An economist said, Lerato, take us through to the next big hashtag of this week. What was it?
So the next one was hashtag moments that made 2016. So this is an interesting one because social media users were going back to the events that made 2016, and one of those are the Oscar Pistorius case, that sentencing hearing where he was walking around in his thumbs showing his vulnerability on that fateful Valentine's Day. And of course, people remember the Doom Pastor healing people.
I don't know whether we should laugh at this one or
I don't
feel
know,
sorry.
Alicia. I'm not so sure because those people need healing. I don't know.
Well, take us through the next ones.
And the next one is Brian Molefe's Saxon World Shebeen. People
What are
are
they
still
saying?
looking. Well, people are still looking for that Shebeen in Saxon World. It hasn't been located yet.
Gentlemen,
It's become a sort of movement, I mean, it's become one of the great South African phrases. Saxon World Shebeen applies to just about everything now. No, it's just very
Dominic, what do you know about the Saxon World Shebeen?
No, I'm still looking for the address. But why I'm laughing is that this is classic South Africa. From the Doom story to Brian Molefe, I think the stress levels are going down because if we take ourselves too seriously, we need these kind of stories now in our kingdom.
Absolutely, Lerato, to wrap up the show with another big hashtag of this week.
Yes, the other one was the hashtag Roseback, the Formula One champion
One
who
of my favorite
resigned.
drivers, yes.
Yes, he resigned after 5 days after winning the title. So people are wishing him well on his future endeavors, and others are rather shocked that he resigned straight after he won the championship. They still want Lewis Hamilton to come and take it over again.
Look, I think it's good to go out while you're still on top. What do you think, Professor? A good move?
Well, I'm not an expert on Formula One, but it's certainly a case of quitting while you're ahead. I can't imagine a better way of quitting while you're in. Win a world championship and say I'm out of here. There are probably quite a few other sports people who could think of that as an option.
Dominique, what?
I'm still trying to console my son. He's a fan of Lewis Hamilton. So the whole week has been telling me that he hates that guy, pointing at Rosberg.
Well, now he's got his you can cheer him up.
Lerato, do we still have more time? I think a little bit more time just for one more story that made it big on the social media trends this week. Take us through it very quickly.
So the other one was the hashtag ANC-NEC. This was a big story this week. People wanted to find out if the president will still be president at the end of it. He still is going down.
What did they say?
People are saying the hashtag NEC will not make the right decision today. Sign the people's motion of no confidence and retweet. Hashtag no Zuma.
All right. And there's Robs. He's saying it's problematic when party loyalty prevails over the well-being of the country. Oh, honey, whatever happened to our ANC. So very, very different reviews about what took place there. What did you gentlemen make about the extended NEC meetings that took place this week, Prof?
Look, what interested me about that is that I believe there's a balance of power in the ANC at the moment. The president's opponents, there are two factions. The other faction can't get rid of the president, but then the president's faction would like to get rid of some of them, and that can't happen. What I was interested in is what happened at the NEC. Did it change that balance of power? Are we now going to see? And my feeling at this stage is that as dramatic as it was, it didn't. I think we're still in a situation where those who want to remove the president can't, but those, there were calls there that various cabinet ministers should be fired because they supported the motion, etc. I suspect that's not going to happen either. And I think the main reason it's going to happen is if you're listening to the comment afterwards, the one thing the ANC is terrified of at the moment is a split. And if you start firing cabinet ministers, then you get a split. So it was very dramatic, but I think that stalemate is still there.
Do you think it was dramatic, Dominique?
Yeah, for me, I think that the last meeting of the NEC actually changed the politics within the ruling party itself. Because of now, you've got people who are able now to come out and voice their concerns, even though they did not get what they wanted.
But I mean, this has been the call that's been going on for the longest time now.
For them to have that platform platform to say we are going to air our views. I think the ANC now has entered another terrain where now party members inside the party are saying that we need to talk about this thing, we need to be upfront with it. But what concerns me was what the Secretary General later said, that he witnessed the hatred. You know, for me, I started to wonder if NEC members can hate each other at that level. What chances do we have as a nation to be led properly if there's hatred at that level?
My goodness. Well, Rato, thank you so much for joining us this week. Do give our viewers the URL where they can get all these stories that you've been talking to us about on our digital front.
So the URL is www.sabc.co.za/news.
All right. Well, that's where you're all going to find it. Let's take a quick ad break, and after that, we're going to commemorate the legacy of Fidel Castro. After that, do stay with us. This is Media Monitor.
Water-wise, water is an essential need. The scarcity of it could lead to loss of many lives, including livestock, plants, and much more. It requires us to use it sparingly and responsibly in times of need, failing which our taps and sanitation will not function. For more on water and weather issues, stay tuned to News Today, every Friday at 5:45 Central African Time. SABC News, making you water-wise.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Cuban leader Fidel Castro's ashes will be scattered today at Santiago de Cuba, where Castro's revolutionists first launched an attack on the US-backed forces of Batista back in 1953. Now, Castro died last week Friday at the age of 90, a decade after stepping down as the president. Today, we commemorate the life of a communist legend that was defiant right up until the end.
It is set for the much-anticipated mass rally tonight in Santiago, the hometown of El Comandante Fidel Castro. A cortege carrying his remains traveled on a 4-day journey across Cuba. Locals lined the streets to bid farewell to their revolutionary leader. Hundreds of dignitaries are expected to attend the mass rally. Amongst them, a strong African delegation, including AU chairperson Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma and the SACP General Secretary Blade Nzimande.
In fact, were it not for the Cubans sending just over 20,000 troops, Angola and Southern Africa would have been very, very different today. And it was the defeat of the apartheid's army at Cutuquane Valley that laid the basis for Namibian independence in 1990 and the beginning of negotiations at home.
For young people, both Cuban and South African, they will forever cherish his memories.
I'm crying. It's you know, I'm in sorrow, but at the same time, I feel great for that thing happened when I'm here in Cuba and I get to experience everything what was going on and to get more information about his life and how he liberated Cuba and so forth.
Our parents and our grandparents try to teach us every single day more and more about those times and the difficulties they were having.
The death of Fidel Castro marks the end of an era. Castro may be gone, but his legacy will surely live on. Many remain inspired by his commitment to social justice and equality around the world. Mzondi Lembeje, SABC News, Havana, Cuba.
Now, gentlemen, Fidel Castro was loved and not liked by some. So what were your views of his legacy, Professor?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, as you say, if you look at South Africa, but it's not that different. I mean, really polarized views. I mean, either people regard him as a saint or they regard him as totally evil. And like all politicians, he was neither. I think that what attracts people, I think there are two things that attracts people to Castro. The one is that he stood up to America, and a lot of people think that that's a good idea, I think, for understandable reasons. The second one is that, whatever was right or wrong with the Cuban system, he never enriched himself. He was quite clearly a politician who believed in a particular cause and was consistent and didn't elevate himself among people. I think that was welcomed by people. The reason I think we need to be a bit more balanced is that Cuba was a one-party state, is a one-party state. People get locked up for expressing their views. And my view is that, as long as that is the case, you really don't know how the Cuban people feel about a leader. If they're not allowed to express themselves, they're not allowed to vote.
Don?
No, I think his legacy, not only is it felt within the Cubans, but throughout South America and also in Africa. So, as Professor was saying, that there will be those who will be celebrating his life, and there will be those who will be saying that good riddance. But the fact remains that as an island, because Cuba is an island, it has massive influence in world politics. From the 50s right up until he stepped down as a president of Cuba 10 years ago. So it shows that either way, his legacy did shape world politics for years and years and years. But coming back to the whole issue of how he managed Cuba, as a leader of that country, there will be those who say that he was a dictator, and there will be those who saying that he not only stood up against the American presidents, but he also tried to give Cubans, a better life, an equal life. Because at the end of the day, he's a president. I'm told that you can't even see statues across the country where he's celebrating his own legacy. So he's a kind of a leader that was more interested in pushing a certain brand of politics.
The liberation of the people, of the minority, so to say. A lot of people are asking, Professor, we know that Barack Obama had started with the talks to try and, bring about, peace between these two nations after 51 years of hostilities, I understand. But what do you think is going to happen to the economy with Donald Trump elected as
well,
the US
that's
president?
a very good point because, although it's a very important event, the passing of Fidel Castro, the future of the Cuban economy at the moment doesn't depend on what happens in Havana. It depends on what happens in Washington. So the issue is Trump going to undo what President Obama had done? If he does, then what will happen is it'll go back to a polarized situation. It'll go back to a situation of conflict. There won't be any changes in Cuba because what was happening in the conversations between President Obama and the Cuban leadership is that there was some, it wasn't only about relations between the two countries, it was about the Cuban economy, etc. So I suppose, if you're worried about United States influence, you probably hope that Donald Trump will be as irrational as possible. But it does really depend on him.
Dominic.
But I hope that the U.S. president-elect, since he came with the ticket of trying to create jobs and everything, he will look at Cuba as another market. So I hope that he will look at Cuba as another market where he can bring in American businesses. Because he needs to create that space. Because of Cuba, I think it's a market that needs to be tapped in. You can move in your McDonald's, your Starbucks and everything. That creates more employment. But as Prof is saying that we're dealing with a US-elect president who's so unpredictable. Because of his understanding of world politics.
Even his win was unpredictable.
His understanding of world politics, even every day you need to just recheck, and scratch certain things that he said during the elections. Because of he changes the script almost every day.
Which is very scary, incidentally, because, if you have the leader of the most powerful country in the world where you don't know what he's going to do from one day to the next.
You can't be sitting at the edge of your seat the whole time.
For the world,
I mean, but then, gentlemen, I think the focus has now shifted back to his brother Raul. Do you think he is perhaps the man to try and, take Cuba home, so to speak, to the righteous land?
Well, look, he has been, despite the fact that, Fidel Castro was this huge president, Raul Castro has, in fact, for the last 10 years been
president
of Cuba. And it relates to your last question. I mean, Raul Castro's view is quite clearly that there must be some adaptations, that yes, they've achieved a certain amount of progress, but that the economy needs to grow, etc. And as we're saying, if what President Obama agreed with the Cubans is allowed to happen, that will probably continue. Otherwise, whether Raul Castro does it or somebody else does it, there probably will be an attempt to say, well, look, if you don't want to, if you don't want to work with us, then we will go back to doing what we did before.
Dominic?
No, I think Fidel Castro's brother, he has been trying over the past 10 years to not only start the negotiations, but to also change the economic structure. Because of, there are legislations that have been put in place now. Cubans are able now to actually import and also do businesses. But that American hand is needed. So that is why it goes back now to what
lift
happens,
the sanctions there.
What happens in Washington in 2 months' time when Donald Trump takes over. Is he going to make sure that he appeals to his conservative friends within the Senate to make sure that he clamps down on Cuba, or he continues where Obama left? The difficulty that I have is that here's a leader who is trying to undo what President Obama has done over the years. So he goes with that ticket of even trying to change the Obamacare health system. Sometimes you just change things for the sake of changing because of you are in charge. So I think that Cuba will have to monitor the situation going forward to check whether the US president-elect is going to continue with those negotiations to open up the space.
Hey, we saw what happened with the Taiwanese president at the phone call yesterday, Professor.
Look, the interesting thing about this, I think, is, he talks about dismantling Obamacare, etc.
Yeah.
It's going to be very difficult for him to do some of the things he wants to do within America because of the way their system works.
Yeah.
So, for example, I think he'll battle to dismantle Obamacare
to change
because there
the
are
policies,
so many hurdles on the way. And, the stuff about throwing out immigrants, etc. I mean, the police chief in Los Angeles, the mayor of New York, has already said, not in our cities, it's not going to happen, and that allows them to do that. The danger is that he's got almost a free hand in foreign policy. He can do as much damage in Cuba and Iran and Taiwan as he wants to. So that is the problem. Unless he's kind of reined in on foreign policy, you can, and that obviously affects all of us. He can do all sorts of crazy.
Those were the big questions during his campaign, his views on foreign policy. I mean, people must be really scared now. Let's take a quick ad break. More Media Monitor shortly after that. Do stay with us.
Give me that paperwork. Where is your paperwork?
Like I'm saying, I don't know what's going on. Suddenly I'm locked up.
This is not fair, Santa Basizan. Not fair.
Who puts a rent 200? Have you put like 200? Urwana, we won. 150, 150 plus. Koloi, Leon, let me give me another one, 150.
I'm just the one to lock you out.
Yes, you just want to lock me then out.
Who are starting gangsterism.
No.
Welcome back. You're still with Media Monitor now. South Africa joined the world to commemorate World AIDS Day this week, themed Hands Up for HIV Prevention. This year's campaign looks at ways to improve prevention strategies, identifying key areas among specific groups of people who are vulnerable to transmission, which are adolescent girls as well as young women in particular. To continue the fight against the pandemic, South Africa began the world's very first HIV vaccine efficiency study, called HVTN 702. Now, the study will determine whether an experimental vaccine regimen safely prevents HIV infection among South African adults. About 5,400 men and women who are all HIV negative have been enrolled in this program, with more than 1,000 people in South Africa becoming infected with HIV daily. A successful vaccine is seen as key to ending the epidemic. But here's more on this clip.
Shortly after South Africa announced renewed efforts to fight the scourge, with a groundbreaking HIV vaccine trial expected to end new infections, a renewed call for a collective effort to fight HIV/AIDS.
Unless we take action now to reduce new HIV infections, we will struggle to go on with our antiretroviral treatment program. And compatriots, unless we act now to reduce new HIV infections, many young lives will be lost.
The country has set ambitious plans in its national strategic plan for the next 5 years in the quest for an AIDS-free generation by 2030. To more than half the number of new infections per year, and to engage in a more robust collective effort.
That is why this World AIDS Day must be about South Africans taking personal responsibility, collective responsibility, and South Africans must indeed take action without fail. It is in our hands to end HIV and tuberculosis through our behavior, through our relationships, through our attitudes. We have the means to end HIV and TB.
4 million of an estimated 7 million living with HIV in the country are women 15 years and older. 2 million are men in the same age. And that's where the focus has now shifted in addressing the changing narrative of South Africa's HIV/AIDS story. As it plans to accelerate its efforts to reduce new HIV infections, in particular among young women. They're the highest risk group, with about 2,000 infected every week. Criselda Lewis, SABC News, at the Sanral Stadium in Davidton.
All right, let's now welcome Ms. Zandile Mjeza, our senior health news researcher. Zandile, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Alicia.
Now, I know at this time of the year you are absolutely very busy, but do tell us, I mean, you saw this, the rolling out of this HTV 702 vaccine. Is an end to the HIV pandemic in sight then? Can we rely on this new vaccine?
I think it's interesting times in HIV research right now, Alicia, because this is a vaccine trial that is happening solely in South Africa. The rest of the world is looking at us with this particular trial to see that is it really possible to prevent new HIV infections through a vaccine. So we're essentially saying that the millions of people who remain uninfected but still at highest risk, they are still a concern in our response to HIV. And should this vaccine trial in a couple of years come back to show that it's really effective, that could dramatically change the course of the HIV epidemic.
Maybe tell us a bit more about the vaccine, Zandile. What do you know about the contents of this vaccine that it could be proven to prevent future HIV infections?
So what's key to note about a vaccine is that a vaccine, from a scientific perspective, it creates memory in the body. So what the vaccine will do is, what it's really testing to see is that can the body remember to kick out HIV infection should it enter. And that is very important, because what we are trying to do, we are trying to target preventative healthcare.
Absolutely.
We're trying to look at the situation from a preventative perspective.
Look, now, World AIDS Day this year was centered around on prevention. Just how significant is this? And do you think that the people are actually going to heed this call? Because we've seen various measures by government and other entities trying to make sure that there's enough awareness out there so that people do know what to do when they, when they find themselves in a situation where a family member or themselves are HIV positive.
This country faces just about 300,000 new infections annually. So if we don't close the tap on new infections, then we are seriously in a lot of trouble.
But why still the uprise in new infections, Zandile, with so many prevention measures?
I think there needs to be a little bit more of engagement and a little bit more understanding between community members, health authorities. I think our health system needs to continue to align itself closer to the issues that affect those that remain at highest risk.
But we know, of course, we can't talk about HIV and stigma and prevention measures. So what are some of the contributing factors as to why people are still getting these new infections, and they're still getting these new infections and not doing anything about them when there's free care that is available out there in form of ARVs?
So there's a lot of awareness campaigns that are going on, but we're still seeing a high number of new infections. Look, the government's plan moving forward is to accelerate existing efforts to say we need to strengthen our response in terms of education. We need to inform people and let them know that these are the risks. We need to identify who's at risk and really tailor-make our response to target the very people we believe are not getting the message. It's all about the message of HIV prevention, the message on HIV infections, and of course the response that's going to be tailor-made for that.
You know, when you speak about the people that are not getting the message here, I have this thing that, we know that the prevalence of HIV and AIDS is common among young women in South Africa. We've just heard in that clip alone, 4 out of that 7 million infected are actually women. I mean, what is going on? What are we not listening to as women?
These are startling statistics, because we learned on World AIDS Day this week that 2,000 South African young women and girls are newly infected with HIV in this country.
Why?
And there was a lot of discussion. I mean, Deputy President, in his capacity as the chairperson of the South African National AIDS Council, he appealed to South Africans to say, among other things, the blesser-blessee phenomenon that is on the rise. We really need to look at that issue. People were glamorizing the issue, but it's really of concern. And the Department of Higher Education and Training has been looking at this issue on how to come into action across the country, looking at young women and girls, among other things, the blesser phenomenon.
Well, that's a lot of work to do there for the country. But Zandile, let's wrap up this discussion. I know there's a lot of discussions at the moment on the National Strategic Plan on HIV. What can you tell us about that?
So this is a really exciting time for South Africa now, because the strategic plan is really our guideline on how to address HIV. And we are looking at the new strategic plan on how are we going to address HIV for the next 5 years. And it's really important for us to note that South Africa wants to look at new infections, and it wants to bring down TB, because a lot of people in the country living with HIV are still very prone to TB infection. So the new strategic plan is going to be coming into effect next year, and we're really at a point where we're transitioning into the new strategic plan, the new NSP.
Zandile, let's talk about the 5.4 thousand females and males that actually took part in this study. How soon are we going to be able to know if actually this vaccine actually worked on them?
So the vaccine trial itself is going to take a couple of years. We're looking about another 3-4 years.
Yeah.
But with each vaccine trial, there are phases in which we will get feedback on how is it going to go. So at this stage, we're going to look at about another year or so before we can hear from scientists how are things going. But we'll only get the official results maybe in another 4 years or so.
But Zandile, what happens to those? I'm very curious. Here's a vaccine. You've been given a vaccine. You are HIV negative. What are they saying? Are they saying, is the message here, go and be sexually active without using protection? What is the actual message behind this?
That is actually a very important question you're asking, Alicia, because it's been at the center of this trial.
Yeah.
A lot of people are curious about it. Essentially, what the vaccine trial is saying is that we will administer this vaccine trial alongside other preventative measures.
Like your condoms.
Like your condoms, like your PrEP. There are other preventative measures that are being encouraged.
The gels as well.
The gels to be given to people alongside this vaccine trial. They're essentially trying to see that with a vaccine trial, live your life the way you do. You have access to other healthcare preventative measures. Let's see how effective it can be if you live your life the way you do and you have access to these preventative measures. What results will we see?
Absolutely, because I think we should not be seen as this vaccine can now promote promiscuity. Absolutely not. Now, we also know that there is an increase to, we're speaking about the HIV plan, the national HIV plan. There's been an increase to access to ARVs, which is a good step by government, but some people are still not getting those vital medicines. Why is that, Zandile? What does research say there?
You know, it is so important that we look at the people who are eligible for ARVs but are not accessing it. But South Africa has now, turned the tide and has moved to a test and treat.
Yes.
And essentially what test and treat now says is that at the point of diagnosis of HIV,
you get treatment.
And that is what we're saying now. We're being proactive. We're saying we're responding, not later when you are eligible, but we're saying as soon as you test for HIV, you get treatment on the spot.
Zandile, where can people get more information about this? These are very interesting facts. They don't know that SABC has a health department like you people that actually go and research this information for us. Where can they get this information?
So we work a lot with the South African National AIDS Council, a lot on HIV/AIDS related issues. We work with the Human Science Research Council. So those are the two organizations that if you go on their website, you will find the information. But then, of course, the SABC News website, there's a lot of information there on HIV/AIDS and other pertinent health issues.
And you've verified this.
And we're on
those big organizations that you've just mentioned, and they are trustworthy. Zandile, thank you so much for your time here. That is Zandile Mjeza, our health research specialist right here at SABC. We're going to take a quick ad break, and after that is Sanral on a downward spiral. Find out after the break.
Presumed U.S. drone strike in the south of the country has killed 3 Al-Qaeda suspects.
Death toll in Yemen's 18-month-old civil war now stands at about 10,000.
People get killed or die and are actually buried before they're recorded. And we don't have a way of recording that, but we know the numbers are much higher.
Water restrictions are to be imposed on villages in and around the Nkomazi municipality.
Pumps can't pump the water because there's no water in a river. And if the water is coming back, then it's full of mud.
Those who can pray and those who can do any miracle to make sure that we've got enough rain, give it a try.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Just before we talk about Sanral, I just want to get quick reactions from you gentlemen. What did you make about the vaccine that were rolled out this week, Prof?
Look, it's obviously potentially incredibly important. I mean, if we're able to produce an HIV/AIDS vaccine, it's going to make a huge difference. But people must be aware, we've just heard that the trials will take 4 years. The way in which medicine works is even if those trials are successful, even if the vaccine works, it's going to take 6 or 7 years after that for it to go through all the medical processes. So for the next 10 years at least, we're not going to have a vaccine, and we need to look at the question of how we deal with the virus, bearing that in mind. Incidentally, the one thing we do need to look at is, yes, there might be a problem with people's attitudes to sex, but the economic issues and the power issues are very important, because it's no accident that most of the people who infect are women, because women are on the wrong end of these power relationships. They're very often doing it because of economic need, and we need to find ways of tackling that.
And this is the issue with the blessers and the blessee phenomenon then, Dom.
Yeah, I'm happy that the Deputy President keeps on,
referring to
that point. Even though, on social media and out there in the public, people make jokes about it. But it's an economic factor. You know, that is why you find that these high-risk groups is your teens and middle-aged men because of that relationship. Last week I attended another health event hosted by the city of Joburg, where they were focusing now on what is called MSM, men who have sex with other men. Now it's coming up as another high-risk factor. And I was saying that whilst we are fighting, you know, the surge, you know, of increasing people getting infected, now there's this group that is coming up now. And so the speakers were saying that if we don't deal with it now, it might be a problem 10 years from now.
It's behavioral change that
Yes.
we need to actually look at, Professor, not attitude so much, eh?
Well, it's also the messages we send out. We need to send out clear messages that exploiting women is not okay. You
That's
know,
true.
Dominic's got a very
That's
good
true.
point. You know, this is not something you joke about. You know, it's not just some, you know, strange thing happening there. It's people exploiting other people, and some of the people who are exploited might die as a result of their exploitation. So it's a very serious social problem.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it on that matter. Let's move on to other news now, where Sanral management was grilled by Parliament this week over wasteful expenditure of more than 1 billion it incurred in the 2015-2016 financial year, mostly attributed to the agency's routine and maintenance contracts. Now, the road agency also made an optimistic revelation that it will exhaust all debt collecting avenues to recover the 11 billion it's owed to unpaid e-toll fees. The e-toll system was launched in 2013 in Gauteng amid a public outcry over those fees. Gentlemen, this is back now again, the issue of e-tolls. Are we seeing this back in the news again, Professor? Have you paid for
clearly
your
it is
tolls?
back in the news. Actually, I do pay e-tolls, but I'll probably get shot on by many people for saying that. I think the issue here is that, I mean, they are not going to, let's cut to the chase here. They are not going to use debt collecting agencies to collect 11 billion. We need to move on from that. The issue is this is an issue of political management.
How so?
Because you can't introduce something like this unless you have a clear plan for how you're going to collect the money. And I don't see any clear plan for how to collect the money. You see, either you've got to appeal to people, and then you have to go through a political process in which you have to convince people that this is fair. Incidentally, I happen to think it is fair. I think it's fair to make people who own cars pay so that other people can drive on the roads. But it hasn't been managed well. You talk about R1 billion wastage with Sanral. Many of the people who are being asked to pay say, well, why should I have to pay if the money is wasted? And it all goes into various people's pockets. So I think, what should have happened from the start is that there should have been a serious attempt to say, look, this is a reasonable way of funding freeways, but also an equally serious effect to make sure that the tendering process was transparent, that there's no wastage, and as long as you don't deal...
the issue how the e-tolls were brought
Well, exactly.
about.
As long as you don't deal with that, people think that this is not a way of funding freeways. They think it's a rip-off, and people are not going to pay if they think it's a rip-off.
Look, I mean, Dominique, the mayors of both Joburg and Tshwane have said that people are no longer going to assist in this matter. So this is very, very worrying.
No, this whole matter of Sanral and e-toll, it will need a political solution because of it is politicized and everything about it. I mean, it's a bread and butter issue. And when people are dealing with bread and butter issues, they always try to find ways of not spending more money to pay. The whole issue of e-tolls in Gauteng was badly handled from day one. I mean, the public comments that were made by politicians, mixed messages, commissions being put in place, where the deputy president at some point was involved to try and find a solution. So it was dragged. So the politics have always been at the center of everything. So I don't see Sanral succeeding in this thing because of people in Gauteng, even if they want to pay. As we know that in most cases they rather first pay your DSTV, SABC and others before they pay their municipal accounts. So it goes down to priorities. People will rather pay things that benefit them inside their own homes. And I don't see e-tolls being on top of the list.
I mean,
look, over time you could, I mean, I agree, but I think that over time, if there was a serious attempt, and I agree, the politics has been totally mismatched. If there wasn't a serious attempt to negotiate this, I mean, clearly there's going to have to be some sort of compromise. Then I think over time you can come to a solution. But clearly this idea of taking a flawed process and saying, well, we're going to get debt collecting agencies, it's a fantasy. So what has to happen is that there has to be a serious discussion between representatives of people who use cars in Gauteng and the authorities to come up with a compromise.
But wasn't that tried and exhausted in the various debates that, they were trying to find common ground with the fuel levy as one of the suggestions? I mean, what needs to happen then now, Dom?
But Alicia, remember, just before we were preparing for the local government elections, I mean, people were saying that the ANC-led government was trying just to find a breathing space. Hence the talks about the e-tolls. They was trying to drag it. So I think I agree with the professor to say that let's have a genuine discussion with motorists and let's remove politics out of it. Because of now, with both mayors of Tshwane and in Johannesburg from the DA, who campaigned on the ticket of saying that elect us in order to remove e-tolls. So this thing is going to drag on. And so I think Sanral will have to find better ways to convince us as motorists to say this is the best model. But for now, for them, going to Parliament and listing 11 billion, I mean, it's serious money. And that money is been wasted, and they can't answer questions in terms of how did they arrive at a situation where there's 11 billion. There are 11 billion in the red.
I mean, we live in a struggling economy, and then we have to pay 11 billion on e-tolls. But anyway, that's where we're going to leave it on that discussion. We're going to take another quick ad break and come back and wrap up the show. Do stay with us.
Animation, virtual reality and games. We have all of that and other technology and social media news.
I've got the full version of the game at home, so I play it a lot at home.
We also tell you how Africans are using tech to improve their lives.
We have to close the digital gap.
So join us on Network for your African technology and social media news. That's Network with Ms. Phumelele Zondi every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
As promised, we're back with Media Monitor now. The immediate dismissal of citizen editor Steven Motale earlier this week was received with shock by the media fraternity. Motale was fired after a damning investigation about former Finance Minister Trevor Manuel and the ANC Chief Whip Jackson Mthembu, which was published in a newspaper a few weeks ago. The former editor had been suspended early in November pending the outcome of an internal disciplinary process when he was dismissed. And for this discussion, we now welcome the president of the Forum of Journalists for Transformation, Mr. Piet Rampedi, on the line. Mr. Rampedi, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to the show.
I mean, sir, the Citizen's editor, Steven Motale, was suspended a few weeks ago following, of course, the publication of anti-establishment articles, they say, and yet FJT is still supporting him. Do tell us why.
Look, we're actually supporting him because we can see he's a victim of a wider media conspiracy and also a systematic abuse, discrimination and exploitation of black journalists by the media industry. He's actually a latest victim, but he's not the only one. So the reason why we think we should actually support him is also because industry bodies like your South African National Editors Forum, the Right to Know and the Freedom of Expression Institute, have also abandoned him. They sided with the media bosses. They chose to defend the right of the media bosses instead of advancing and upholding editorial independence. So in this case, we felt because they've abandoned him for doing his work and for standing his ground when the Caxton owner, Terry Mollman, and publisher, Yureka tried to interfere editorially and dictate content to him. So we felt we needed to defend him and also to in the main, also safeguard the rights of black journalists to practice their craft without any harassment and discrimination and racism, because what has happened to him is actually happening to the majority of black journalists across all media houses. They're treated unfairly, they are exploited, especially in the privately owned print media houses.
So you think this is rife then, Mr. Rampedi, across many publications, and you held a march on the 23rd of November. Do you think it yielded any results?
Look, when we went there to march, we knew already that Mr. Motale's fate had been decided already, because the attitude of the management of Caxton, especially Yureka Zenbeck, was very much anti-Steven Motale. You recall that when they suspended him initially, they offered him a so-called golden handshake to leave quietly, because they said his services were no longer needed, and that they also accused him of having a personal vendetta against former Minister Charles Emmanuel. So when he refused to accept that offer, that's when they put him on suspension pending the outcome of an internal disciplinary hearing. They gave him a deadline to respond by Friday last week at 1 o'clock. When he responded and said, okay, we're willing to go ahead with the DC, they said, your services, your contract has been terminated with immediate effect, and you're no longer welcome here. But what is also worrying about how Citizen has conducted itself around this issue is that you'll also recall that they didn't even subject him to due process, which is very much worrying, because we know that in terms of the Labor Relations Act, everybody, including people who are presumed to be guilty until proven innocent, they still have the right to be subjected to due process. But we are actually fortunate and happy, because Mr. Motale is challenging his unlawful suspension and dismissal, in the labor court, and Citizen has been served with the papers already, and the case will be heard on December 19th. We'll be there behind him. We'll go there to support him, because we think he's just a victim of a wider systematic abuse and exploitation of black journalists by the industry.
Mr. Rampedi, thank you so much for that. That was Mr. Pete Rampedi on the line there, and he was talking to us about the Axe. It is a newspaper editor, Steven Motale. Gentlemen, what do you make about that? I mean, Pierre here says that it seems that the issues of editorial interference are quite rife across many media houses.
Well, if you're talking about managements interfering with what journalists do, it is indeed rife, and it's been going on for at least 35 years. The question is, what do you do about it? Because the argument is always, well,
how do I stay credible?
These are private companies, etc. I think what one does about it is, what Mr. Rampedi is doing about it. You make a lot of noise about it. I don't think there's anything else you can do about it. In this particular case, in the Motale case, as he mentioned, there may be another dimension there.
Yeah.
And another dimension is that there's an allegation that they broke labor law.
Yeah.
Because if you fire somebody without giving them a hearing, then that's a contravention. So I think what's going to happen in the next few days is, if that happened, there's going to be a serious attempt to take legal action against the newspaper if they didn't give him a proper hearing.
It seems that we might hear more stories about the publication, because it seems that there's other black people that have been mistreated within the organization.
Yeah, no. It's going to drag on, because of it's not only going to end with the editor, but as you rightly say, that other journalists now are coming back to say that
we
this
also
is how we're treated. But to give a broader view about the relationship between being editorial independence and business objectives, I think editors across the country, they are standing on thin ice, because of now, with the margins shrinking, newspapers are private companies looking for profit. So, now editors are under a lot of pressure, because of, in most cases, in order to bring in business, you need to also negotiate your editorial.
But then journalistic code?
No, the codes will still be there. That is why I say that we need in today's South Africa. We need strong editors who can actually, in a way, differ with their bosses to say that we are going to stand our ground, this is how we're going to publish. But with newspapers being private companies and driven on profits, editors are going to be pushed by their bosses to say we're going this direction, even though it might impede on certain rules of journalism.
My goodness, there was big noise about transformation in the newsrooms.
You see, the problem in this country is that, quite rightly, and it is an issue, we worry a lot about journalistic independence in the public sector, and that is very important. And we don't pay any attention to it in the private sector, because if you have, as Dominic says, if you have a situation in which all the private media outlets are in a situation where what journalists can and cannot say is dictated by business priorities, then you don't get a free media space. So we need to look at the public space, but we need to look at the private space as well.
Prof, let's leave it there, gentlemen. Dominic, thank you so much. Good to see you again. That is Dominic Mahlangu, as well as Professor Steven Friedman, joining us for our analysis of the news that kept you talking this week. That's where we leave it on Media Monitor. We're back next week, same time and place. That is right here on the SABC News channel, sharp at 9 o'clock. I'm back on top of the hour with A News. This is SABC News.